if I've been raised with a continual pulling down of my worth
Yes.
from a young age,
Yes.
then as I've grown into adulthood and I haven't forgiven,
It's highly unlikely you would have, because you probably would feel quite hurt by that emotion and resentful and those kind of emotions. And so it's probably unlikely that you've let it go.
so let's say in this case I haven't let it go, then you're saying that creates an openness in me. If somebody else continues as an adult to have the intention to harm me through pulling down my worth,
Yep.
I'm quite likely to accrue more worth, more hurt rather.
Yes, or act in ways that repel the hurt but cause damage to others. You'll do one of the two.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. But in those cases, I would have something to forgive, not only from my childhood, but from towards these people in adulthood.
Yes.
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 If we contrast that then to where I've been raised with a very healthy sense of my worth, which is rare on earth, but if I've been raised in a family where my worth was not elevated or pulled down,
that
it's
generally
very
on
rare.
Earth doesn't happen, but
Very rare.
yeah.
But assuming it did.
Assuming it did.
Or pertaining to any other kind of injury,
no,
my
that's fine.
appearance or whatever.
Yeah.
And then as an adult, somebody attempted to harm me through trying to harm me in regards to my appearance, for example, if we use that example. But I've felt pretty healthy about that. I don't carry any hurt about that from my childhood. Will that unloving intention, sin, that has an emotional content, will that enter me as a hurt?
Probably not.
And so in those conditions, I would have nothing to forgive that person for.
No, the person's still broken the law with the intention.
They have.
They have.
So they have issues.
But it's very
do I
easy
have
for you to
issues?
forgive because you don't feel any hurt.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
forgiveness is emotional forgetfulness,
Yes.
as we'll learn.
Yes.
So once we learn that, we see, okay, because I don't feel that really hurt me very much, there's hardly any emotion
To let go of.
to let go of.
And
sense?
we'll talk about how to forgive, which
Yes.
is basically that.
Yeah.
So, and that probably leads me neatly to the at-one-ment condition that you raised.
Yeah.
Because in that example, you said that a person who's at one with God forgives those who desire to harm them immediately.
Yes,
And
because they don't feel any hurt at all.
yes. So does that, however, because we said that these are the conditions for forgiveness, that there's an entry of this unloving intention or desire into another person, does the person who's at one with God actually experience that entry of emotion and immediately forgive it, or it just doesn't enter?
All emotions for a person who's at one with God pass through them without there being any emotional response in them.
So it does enter them.
So it enters them,
And there's a forgiveness process that happens because...
but it's immediate because
Yes.
there's no emotional response.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, so it enters them still, just like it would enter a normal person under normal circumstances who has other emotional damage. But because there's nothing in which it can resonate with,
Yes.
it just passes straight through and out the other end, if you like. Straight through and one out the other type of thing. Straight in, out the other. You know, that's how it feels. It's like it doesn't. There's nothing inside of that soul for that emotion to remain in it. The conditions don't exist inside the soul.
Yeah.
For the worthless emotion to remain in it, because the soul doesn't feel worthless in the example you gave.
Yeah. So, I just wanted to clarify there is an actual substance that does enter, and that is necessary for the forgiveness. So the first essential thing is the breaking of the law, the sin.
Which is all emotional, remember.
It's all emotional, and it can be in ways that we don't yet want to be sensitive to or cognizant of.
Thought as well as feelings and actions and intentions and desires. And,
Yes.
Yep.
The whole thing.
The whole gambit of what can happen inside of the soul.
Yeah. Towards another person that's harmful, an intention to harm them.
It's an intention to be harmful, yes. Yeah. Or it could even be an accidental harm, of course.
Yeah.
Can be.
So
Doesn't have to be specifically an intention.
So just something that creates harm.
Just something that creates harm. Yeah.
For the other person.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's an important distinction that we didn't make. So we can sin without the intention to sin, are you saying?
Yes, of course.
Yep.
Of course.
Yep.
Sin, if we look at sin means breaking the law.
Yeah.
We can break the law without the intention to break the law.
Yes.
Right. Or we can break the law with the intention to break the law.
Yeah.
Right.
Or could you say we can break the law in ignorance, with sincere lack of knowledge of the law?
Sometimes it's rare because sincere ignorance requires effort generally. So, we desire to be ignorant many times and we can't blame it on that,
So what was the example you gave just before? Sorry, it's just, you said we can break the law without the intention to break the law, and we can break it with intention. Yes. So how do I break the law without intention if my ignorance requires
Let's say as
effort?
a child, we are put in a situation where we don't understand much at all.
Yes.
For example, a child touching a hot stove is breaking the law.
That's what I meant.
Thermodynamics.
It's a genuine lack of knowledge of law.
Yeah.
That creates
and no
sin.
Experience.
Yeah.
And so under those circumstances, the child just made a mistake.
Yeah.
It has a consequence. But that's very different than a person purposefully putting their hand on the stove.
Totally. Yeah.
Very, very different consequence.
Yeah.
Purposely doing it knowing that they're going to get burnt.
Yeah.
Or putting somebody else's hand on the stove knowing they're going to burn them.
Yeah.
Is very, very different than accidentally doing it.
Yes.
Or doing it without knowing.
But under all circumstances, it's sin.
Of course, it's sin, but of different degrees.
Yes.
Obviously, sin, yes, they're all sins because we've broken the law. But the degree is whether it was intentional, unintentional, informed, uninformed, ignorant, not ignorant. These are all considerations that the law, God's laws, measure.
And remembering again, we're just talking here about whether I have something to forgive.
Yes.
So it's really just if somebody has harmed me, and it's just if somebody has harmed me, even if I'm at one with God, there's still something to forgive.
Yes, the difference obviously is what we've stated already.
Yeah.
And that is that if I'm at one with God, because I have no emotional resonance with their intention,
Yep.
it doesn't feel bad.
But I still have to perform the process, don't I?
You do, but it's instant.
Yes.
It's instant forgiveness. This is how God forgives. It's instant. God forgives every act that we undertake instantly because God has no emotional resonance with the action we've taken because those actions and feelings don't exist in God. But God forgives us instantly. But the law still operates.
Yeah.
Just because God's forgiven us instantly, it doesn't mean the law is going to change.
Yeah.
We've still got to go through the process of repentance under those circumstances to benefit from the law.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Do you feel we've covered that?
Yeah, I feel it's important that our listeners get the idea that firstly the law has to have been broken, actually broken.
Yeah.
Many times on earth there is the interpretation that I've been hurt. Quite often we have people say to us, "You hurt me because you said this about me," and I said, "But that's true." Yeah. And my intention wasn't to harm you. My intention was to help you see that that's the truth. So I don't see how I've sinned under those circumstances. It's true. Now, if my intention was to harm you, well, that would be different. But my intention isn't to harm you, and so that's not true. So yes, we often see things as being harmful when they're not actually harmful. Yeah. Here we're saying no.
The conditions under which I have something to forgive.
It has to be a real sin where somebody has disobeyed God's laws, intentionally or otherwise, and it's resulted in harm for me.
Beautiful.
Right? And remember, disobeying God's laws includes things like addictions, projection of emotion, projection of feelings, fear.
Yeah.
So it's very refined.
Yeah. When you mention fear, what do you mean by that?
Well, the holding on to fear is a sin.
Yeah.
And the desire to affect others through fear, manipulate others through your fear, is a sin from God's perspective. You're disobeying God's laws. You're becoming manipulative in order to avoid sin, in order to avoid fear, sorry.
Yeah.
So it's a harmful process that you're engaging now. So there's a lot of people who justify sin on the basis of, I'm afraid, so therefore I can sin.
Yeah.
And that's not how God sees it.
Yeah.
God says, you're afraid, but you're sinning. I'm going to still measure the sin. And it's an intention.
Yeah.
Whether it's driven by fear or not, it's an intention to sin.
And it is an intention. Every intention to sin does harm others.
Yes. And your fear intentionally is you're intentionally harming others. You're intentionally attempting to manipulate others. It's harming people. It's a sin. Whether you think it's justified or not, it's immaterial to God and immaterial to the law.
Yeah.
Like, it's a sin, it's going to be corrected. Right? And it is any time a person disobeys the law.
Yeah.
Anytime, for whatever reason, it doesn't matter what reasons. Obviously, some reasons are worse than others, and they will be measured, but it doesn't really matter what reason.
So, yeah.
It's a sin. If somebody has sinned and they've projected that particular sin towards myself, then I have something to forgive. Now, if I'm at one with God, I'll do it instantly because there's no emotional resonance within me. There's nothing inside of me that I have to feel about it.
Yeah.
I recognize it as their feeling, not mine.
Yes.
Emotionally.
Yes. And you mentioned the person who is not yet at one with God, but who has less resonance with the way in which a person's trying to manipulate or harm them. They will find it easier to forgive.
Correct.
Because there's less resonance, and we're going to get onto the process of forgiveness in our next discussion.
Yeah.
But
because there's less resonance internally, there's nothing that it affects. There's very little ways in which that sin has affected them.
Yeah.
From God's perspective, the sin is just as severe as if it had affected them.
Yes. Yes.
So from the way God measures the original sin on the perpetrator's part is that it's just as bad as if when nobody's affected as it is when everybody is.
Yeah.
Right? That's how God measures it. But on this part of the person who's received the projection emotionally, received the action, received the sin, the intention to be harmed, if there's no resonance inside of them, they won't be harmed by it. So, quite often, for example, we receive emails that say things like, oh, you're a homosexual, blah, 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 and they rave on about as if I'm going to feel bad about being a homosexual, right? And it does have no effect on me whatsoever. I'm not confused about my gender, my sexual preference. And my preferences. And so it has no effect on me whatsoever.
Yeah.
So in that regard, there's no emotional resonance in me, and that person they're still sinning. And their intention is still the same. And
because we're talking here about forgiveness, you're saying that it almost feels like there's nothing to forgive because it doesn't really affect you, or do you?
No, I recognise the error. You see, sin requires the receiver to understand that there is an error in the perpetrator's action.
Yes.
So I recognise the error in their action. But there's no emotional resonance in me that requires an action on my part.
But do you feel you've forgiven them?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So other times there's an emotional resonance in me. Yeah. And then I've got a fair bit of work to do here because I've got not only to forgive that person, but I've now got to work through the reason why this open emotional resonance has occurred. And that's related to other things I haven't forgiven from my childhood events.
Yes.
And that requires quite a lot of work on my part now.
Yeah.
Yeah. We talk about the mechanisms later.
Yeah.
But just using that as an illustration to see how sometimes there's an emotional resonance, sometimes not. Also here, we're not talking about denial of emotion. So a lot of people think there's no emotional resonance when it's quite obvious there is huge emotional resonance with them about something.
Yeah.
And that's complete denial, and that's not what we're talking about here.
No.
We're talking about the emotional experience being fully aware that the person has perpetrated a sin towards you, a sin towards God, breaking God's laws that has affected you, and that you recognise that action is wrong from God's perspective, and you also, after recognising it's wrong, have let go of any emotional response that you now have to that event.
So that's the process of forgiveness. But the conditions under which we have something to forgive, it's just that very first thing happens.
The very first thing has to happen, yes.
Yes.
That's right. So we need to understand that those conditions have to exist. And the reason why we raise this in the presentation now is because there are a lot of times when people think they've got to forgive somebody else when they don't. And there's a lot of times when people think they've got nothing to forgive when they've got huge things to forgive.
Yes.
Right? Because they're not recognizing the sin of the other person.
Yeah.
They don't even believe it's a sin.
Yeah.
So we see this a lot with addictions.
Yeah.
Where if you've got a codependent addiction, let's say you've got an addiction with me and you perpetrate...
You make me feel safe and I'll make you feel like you're a very worthwhile man.
Worth having sex with or whatever,
Yeah.
you know. So let's say that's a codependent addiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now your projection at me that I make you feel safe from God's perspective is a sin and breaking one of God's laws, because you're not owning your fear, you're not feeling your fear, you're not releasing it, you're expecting somebody else to, demanding that somebody else make it go away and so forth. There's a lot of reasons why it's a sin from God's perspective. That exists within you.
And something that you're going to have to forgive.
But I'm happy that that exists in you.
Yeah, because you get the payoff.
Because I get the sexual payoff, which is a sin that exists in me.
Yeah.
Now, under those circumstances, we've both sinned, right? We both are not recognising that there is, in fact, a sin, a breaking of God's laws, an attempt to disobey God's laws.
Most couples think that it's a good relationship when both are equally getting the codependence met. Like that.
Most couples would think, "Oh, great relationship. This is fantastic." Now, to forgive anybody, we need to first recognise the sin in something, and that's where I see a lot of people go astray.
Yeah,
because they think there's sin in things that are not sinful, and then they think there's no sin in things that are terribly sinful.
Yeah.
And addictions are one of the things that most people think, that's not a sin, that's just me pleasing her and she's pleasing me and it's fantastic. And from God's perspective, both of you are sinning intensely.
Yes.
And there will be consequences for that. So, you know, this is why we raise the issue, what are the conditions under which forgiveness has to occur? The first has to be the recognition of the sin.
Yes, yes.
So the recognition that somebody
the truth that there is sin. The truth, yeah.
Yeah, and that there's a disobedience to God's laws, a desire to disobey God's laws. Yeah, and that has to exist before I can forgive anything. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a very important thing I feel that we need to emphasise in this discussion.
Yes. Moving on,